We hope you enjoy listening to this podcast of St. Louis on the Air, brought to you by University College at Washington University. With undergraduate and graduate programs, part-time, evening, and online. University College at Washington University, offering world-class education within reach.
Welcome to St. Louis on the Air. I'm Don Marsh. On November 6th, St. Louis County voters will be deciding whether to increase the county's sales tax by 1/8 of a cent. The tax would only apply in the county. Proceeds would go to the St. Louis Zoo to help finance a zoo breeding facility in North St. Louis County. It's a controversial proposal. We'll get both sides now. Joining me in studio is Jeffrey Bonner, the president and CEO of the St. Louis Zoo. He'll pitch for a yes vote. On the other side is Ben Uchatel, former chairman of the Zoo Museum District Board. Thank you, gentlemen, both, so much for being with us. Great to have you.
Thank you very much.
Ben, I'm going to start with you because I think some people might be confused, given the fact that you've had such a close relationship with the zoo over the years, that now you're on the other side of the zoo on this particular issue.
Well, just a clarification, I was on the Zoo Museum District Board, which is a separate entity which supervises the property taxes that are raised for the zoo and the art museum. So it's a separate entity. So I like the zoo, but there's a separation there.
All right. Well, let's get to the basics here in this. And Jeffrey, I'll start with you here. Make your best case for the passage of this sales tax.
Well, the St. Louis Zoo is 108 years old, and it gets to the point where you stop repairing and start replacing. And you get around 108 years old, and major systems need to be replaced, and that the pace of that deterioration is accelerating. Of course, at the same time, we're worried about the sustainability of our animal collections. And the simplest way I can put it is that we have too many different kinds of animals and not enough of each kind. So if we're going to maintain some of the rarest, most endangered species in the world for your children, for your grandchildren, we're going to have additional space to do that. Now, the space that we're developing will have a public component. So think about the San Diego Wild Animal Park or something like that. We will be charging admission to that, and it will, of course, be free to St. Louis County residents. The thing that people have to understand is we can't charge admission to the St. Louis Zoo. It is free by law. It's a matter of law. People often say, well, laws can be changed, but think about reopening such a complicated piece of legislation and the devastating downstream effects it could have if it doesn't go well, and it likely wouldn't. It's not something that we really want to do. And if you think about it, even if we could change the legislation, is it something that the people want? It's your zoo. We just have the extraordinary privilege of taking care of it for you. And what we've heard loud and clear from our constituents, from you all, is that you want the zoo to remain affordable. You want it to be an attractive place for families. You want it to be great in the future. It's one of the great things about St. Louis, and the ZMD is one of the great things that this community has accomplished.
And Ben, an admission charge is something that you'd want folks to consider, correct?
Absolutely. And there's no reason why the legislation cannot be changed to reflect that fact. After all, the zoo was able to get the legislature to change and permit the possibility of a sales tax. The sales tax, in my judgment, is the unfairest way of raising funds for the zoo. It's regressive in the extreme. We're at a point now where we're approaching and even exceeding 10%, and this would be on top of that. There's no control. The Zoo Museum District would not control this. The money would be used for any purposes that the zoo wanted it for, not just for this new facility, a proposed new facility in St. Louis County. There's no sales tax coming up for the city of St. Louis, no sales tax for St. Charles County or any of the ring counties. And in addition to that, there's no sunset provision on it. So it would go on indefinitely, and the zoo would get the money and could decide how it would spend in any way it sees fit. In addition, finally, there are the other districts, like the Art Museum, the Science Center, the Botanical Garden. What's to stop them from saying, well, we want a sales tax too? Why should the zoo go it alone? The other institutions might do the same, and then we would really have kind of death by a thousand arrows. So I think it's an unfair tax and an unfair time.
Now, fairness is a question that comes up, Jeffrey, more than once with regard to the way the overall funding has been handled, because there are so many people, obviously, who go to the zoo who aren't paying the freight, as it were. How do you answer the unfair accusation?
Well, Ben alluded to the fact that legislation can be changed. We did go forward to the state to get enabling legislation. And of course, we wanted Franklin, Jefferson, and St. Charles as part of that legislation. And it got stripped out because legislation almost never turns out the way that it is when you initially present it. We're not done on November 6th. Immediately thereafter, we're going to go back and we're going to try and get St. Charles, Franklin, and Jefferson back into the into the taxing district. We're looking forward to, I think, some success in that realm. We've tried to talk to people. We've pulled a little bit out there, and in fact, folks in those counties really do want to support us. So it's a question of getting on the ballot, which means getting through the legislature. So, it's a lot of this stuff is by law, and I don't think Mr. Uschitel really wants to deal with that. The institutions have never run together since the creation of the ZMD, so they have to, by law, run separately. So really there isn't that kind of a split that he alludes to. And things like a sunset, certainly that's possible, but if you have a couple thousand animals up there and you don't have an assured source of funding, you just can't proceed on that basis. I mean, it would be silly to engage in that undertaking and not know that we would have the support to maintain it.
Ben, I understand that one of your concerns is the fact that there's nothing that would stipulate, if this passes, that money would be used necessarily only for this facility in North County.
Absolutely not. As the ballot measure says very specifically that it can be used exclusively for any purpose whatsoever that the zoo decided, not just for the North County facility whatsoever. Going back to this admission, there was a survey done by St. Charles County, and over 60% of the visitors from St. Charles County to the zoo said that they would be glad to pay an admission fee. An admission fee makes sense. It's an admission fee for people who enjoy the facility, who enjoy the garden or the like. So that, and rather than a regressive sales tax, makes all the sense. And don't forget, right now, St. Louis County and the city of St. Louis are paying and have been paying a big property tax for the zoo and the other institutions. Now what the zoo wants is to put a sales tax on top of the property tax. Unfair in my judgment.
What about this notion that the revenues raised by this tax, if it passes, would be in your hands? Could you commit every nickel that would come in from that tax to go to the North County facility?
It's a little like saying, you pay your school tax, and by golly, the school system can spend it on anything they want in order to educate children. I don't see why that's such a bad thing, especially considering that my child could use an education. So of course we want to be able to use it properly to preserve the wonderful urban zoo that we have. We want to use it properly to sustain our collections. We want to develop a marvelous facility in North County, and I think that's a part of the community that really, really, really could benefit from something like that. People talk about regressive sales taxes and people of limited means paying more than their fair share. Well, you're now talking about people of limited means in a very disenfranchised, under-resourced part of our community getting something wonderful. It's a game changer for North County. It really makes a difference. It's not just a game changer for the St. Louis Zoo. It changes our region, and that's a very, very important thing.
What happens if this does not pass? What happens to that property in North County?
Well, it won't be developed. I mean, at some point, maybe 20 or 25 years down the road, we'll be able to develop it, but for the time being, we won't be able to develop it.
Yeah. I'd like to talk for a moment about what your plans are for that so that people understand what it is that you want to do. Where are we now in that whole process? The land has been acquired, it's been paid for, as I understand it.
Yeah, the land was funded with private donations.
Right.
And what we're looking for now is after November 6th, when we're hopefully people will vote yes, Z is for zoo, vote yes on Proposition Z, we'll move into a full-fledged planning mode. I would think it would take us over a year, building a whole new kind of institution. We're not sure we've ever seen, I call it the inside-out zoo, we're not sure we've ever seen it done well yet. And it's going to take a long time to do that. It'll take a long time to bring online, too.
What In terms of admission, you are seriously considering having an admission charge for that and having some sort of a safari operation. What is that all about?
Right. The admission charge was mandated by the county for this new facility. As I mentioned, it's against the law to charge for admission to the St. Louis Zoo proper. The safari park, I don't know if your listeners have ever been to the San Diego Wild Animal Park or someplace like that. It's just imagine animals being all the way around you, being able to reach up and feed a giraffe or reach down and scratch a rhino's nose, to really be in their environment. There's an awful lot of things we can do out there, and it's a gorgeous piece of property.
You mentioned the San Diego Zoo, and it's one of the best in the country. Many people argue not quite as good as the St. Louis Zoo, but it costs $55 to go into the zoo, and that's.
Well, that's when you get into the charging model.
Yeah.
We would look probably a lot like Columbus, I suppose, if it came to that. Those zoos that get substantial tax support, like Columbus, $17 million a year, still charge an awful lot for people within the tax district and an awful lot for people outside the tax district. I'm not sure that St. Louisans really want that. Like I say, what sets St. Louis apart from, say, Washington, D.C., this is the city in the United States with the most wonderful world-class free institutions, and it's become a destination, and it's a big part of our identity and our international national reputation. So it's an important thing. I don't think it should be destroyed willy-nilly.
Ben, I mentioned the charge for the San Diego Zoo because that scares a lot of people. And if we had admission fees here, they think that it could very quickly rise to that level.
Well, to the contrary, we've done some studies on that subject. And if you had a small admission fee, let's say $8 or $10, to non-city, non-county people, it would generate upwards and more of $10 million a year for starters. And keep in mind also something that is not frequently known, that over 50% of the people who visit the zoo are not from St. Louis or St. Louis County. So all of these people are potential visitors who are happy to come and who are happy to pay a reasonable admission fee to enjoy the zoo. And again, I want to emphasize that this sales tax, in my judgment, is the unfairest way of facilitating and paying for the zoo's needs. There's so many other ways. Private donations. That's how they bought the facility in North St. Louis County. So there are ways to do it, and an admission fee makes sense.
Is that, Jeffrey, not inevitable at some point? There's going to be an admission fee for the St. Louis Zoo.
Well, we last got a tax increase in 1983, and I like to say that if all the political subdivisions, school districts, sewer districts, Brentwood, Maplewood, whatever, were as wonderful stewards of those public funds as the zoo were, the world would be a different place in terms of sales tax. I think we've gone from 83 to 2018 and been very, very careful. I don't see where we can't go another quarter of a century or so without encountering a set of problems. I think you make a good point that the needs in the world are changing so rapidly. The number of species that are increasingly without a home, that call St. Louis Zoo their only home, their last resort. That number is increasing, and I think I can agree with you that there's going to be pressures, and over the next quarter of a century, we'll feel them.
We have a number of callers. Did you want to add something to that?
I would just say that I support the idea that we need funds, but the worst way to raise the funds is a regressive sales tax, which hurts the most people who can least afford it.
Is that offset at all by what it would do for the economy in North County? 100 or more jobs would be created, as I understand it there.
It may be, but there are ways to create those jobs without a sales tax.
Are there, Jeffrey?
If there were, I wish that something would have been done in North County a long time ago. I don't see any real economic development taking place there. And I do know, as we talk to people up there, and we've been in meeting after meeting after meeting, they're so excited. They see this as the way forward for it. And it's not just Spanish Lake Blackjack and Ferguson. It really goes all the way into Florissant, where people are saying, this is a game changer. Two great franchises in St. Louis, the Zoo and the Cardinals. Putting the St. Louis Zoo up here is the biggest difference maker they'll see.
To reference the Cardinals is to state that people are happy to pay to go to Cardinal games. And I support the idea of having a facility in St. Louis County and in North St. Louis County. But the way to pay for it is through admission fee and through property taxes and through private donations, and not a sales tax on the people who can least afford it.
And shouldn't it be a regional thing? I mean, bringing in the outlying counties, St. Charles County and Jefferson County.
Yes, as Dr. Bonner mentioned, the idea of having a sales tax in St. Charles County and the other counties was presented, but they didn't want it. But they are agreeable, I would emphasize, to having a admission fee.
Yeah. How do you differentiate between a Jefferson County visitor and a city or a St. Louis County visitor in terms of who would pay an admission fee and who would not?
Oh, we do the same thing that zoos around the nation do. They just check driver's license at the door.
So you have to
Yeah,
have
it's pretty
some
straightforward.
form of identification.
Some form of ID,
from you.
yeah.
Okay, let's take some calls. We have a number of people who are interested in this issue. We'll begin with Matt calling from St. Louis. Matt, thank you for waiting. You're on the air.
Good afternoon, Don. Thanks for taking my call. Dr. Bonner, hello, and Ben, good afternoon. Appreciate the conversation. I think it's very important for our citizens to see both sides of it. However, I respectfully disagree with Ben and his characterization of the tax as well as the potential negative impact of charging at our zoo. We have done studies, but by the way, I'm past president of the St. Louis Zoo Association, so that you're aware of that. In terms of, past studies, we realized that we would probably lose 1 million visitors were we to charge admission like some of the other zoos do, like Dr. Bonner mentioned, maybe the Columbus Zoo. With respect to the concept of the sales tax being regressive in nature, I actually think that charging admission would be more disenfranchising, even punitive to our fellow citizens who can't otherwise afford or would not otherwise be able to afford it going to the zoo. There's some data that suggests that the average income in St. Louis, the region, is $52,488, taxed at 22%. That yields a disposable income of $40,000 roughly. Taxed at the 1/8 of 1 cent, that yields about $51. I think it's far more fair to our citizens to charge, if you will, through the sales tax, $51 for the opportunity to visit North County facility or Safari Park 365 times, as to pay.
Matt, I think you're losing us. We don't have an abacus or a calculator with us here. Put a bottom line on your statement, please, so we can react.
The bottom line is that the charging admission to those, like Dr. Bonner said before, would be disenfranchising. Our zoo has been open and free to all of our fellow citizens since its creation, and I think it should stay that way.
Okay, Matt, thank you for the call. We'll move on.
Thanks, Matt. I would just answer that 2 ways. There would be no charge on an admission basis for people who are residents of St. Louis or St. Louis County. They already pay property tax. And 2, San Diego, for example, charges, and they get over 3 million people a year. I disagree with the concept that charging a small admission fee would cut back on the number of visitors to this great zoo.
And Jeffrey, you don't go along with that, obviously.
Well, I can't name a zoo, and I know all of them. The vast majority of zoos get tax support of some sort, and some of them get substantial tax support, about the same level as St. Louis, and all of them charge for everybody. So they have discounts for people within the tax district, but they don't let them in for free. I don't even know where Ben is inventing these numbers from, but it just doesn't work that way.
The numbers come from reports that we've studied when we were on the Zoo Museum District Board.
Let's take another call. Charles in the Central West End wants to get into the conversation. Go ahead, Charles.
Hi. I was the sponsor of the original legislation that set up the Zoo Museum District. And I also served on the ZMD with Ben. And there were no studies from that period with respect to admission and what it would result in terms of dollars at the St. Louis Zoo. But the bottom line is, if the people of St. Louis County want to develop the North County facility, the Conservation and Animal Science Center, they're going to have to get tax support to do that. Because, number one, what Ben is proposing, he's been proposing for the last 4 or 5 years, and he's been unable to get the legislature to agree with it. And you can't charge admission without an act of the legislature. Secondly, charging admission, as he is proposing, isn't going to raise the necessary funds to support the new facility. So I think it's really ill-timed for him to raise this issue. I think the issue is whether people want to see the zoo progress so that they can, particularly with hooved animals, have a facility to propagate.
Charles, thank you. I'm going to interrupt because our time's getting away. I want to give Ben a chance to respond.
Yeah, I would respond to Charlie by saying, one, the studies were based upon the fact that the botanical garden charges, and it raises a significant amounts of money on the 900,000 people it gets as visitors. And you interpolate that to the 3 million that the zoo gets, and that's how you get those figures. And we went through that formula and studies once before. But once again, to charge a sales tax to city people, to county people for this facility is unfair and regressive, with no sunset provision and no supervision whatsoever. So it doesn't make sense in that manner.
Another quick call. Lottie from Spanish Lake. Go ahead, but quickly, please, Lottie.
Yes. Thank you for this great discussion on the issues around the zoo. We are so excited out here in Spanish Lake and in North County about the possibilities that are developed with the zoo coming to the area. We think about not just the economic impact, but of hiring people and getting kids jobs in the area. We also think about the educational piece of it, where the zoo has a great history of working with school districts and with working with young kids to get them more exposed to animals and wonderful things that come with that exposure.
Lottie, thank you so much. Again, time is getting in our way. Jeffrey, there's a yes vote for you.
Oh, good.
You would agree with that, I'm sure.
Yeah, it sounded like it.
One thing I would just emphasize, that if this sales tax should pass, and I hope it does not, for the reasons I've just stated, it can be used for many, many different things, and would be used, as Dr. Bonner said. The zoo is 100 years old, and it needs improvements up and down the line. So how it would be used would only be determined by them alone and not by a separate independent body.
Right. A final thought in 30 seconds, if you would, Jeffrey.
We have the best zoo in the United States, easily one of the best in the world. It's getting old. We're worried about the sustainability of the collections. We're worried about the sustainability of the infrastructure. We've also got a tremendous opportunity. We can do an extraordinary thing in North County, and taxpayers have an opportunity to do something extraordinary too. They can keep the zoo the best in the nation, one of the best in the world, and make a great place for education for children and families. It's a unique opportunity, a unique configuration, and I hope people will support us on November 6th.
We had asked through Twitter to get some sort of input from our listeners as to where they stood on this issue, and we've only had a few dozen responses, but you might be interested to know that 47% say they plan to support Proposition Z, 23% plan to vote no, and 30% say they're not sure, that they are undecided. Final thought from you, Ben? You should tell me.
The final thought is that the zoo needs revenue, but the worst way to obtain that revenue is through a regressive, no sunset provision, no supervision provision of a sales tax.
We'll let it go at that. Gentlemen, I want to thank you so much for being with us. Jeffrey Bonner, President and CEO of the St. Louis Zoo, thank you. Ben Uschitel, thank you so much for being with us. We'll see what the voters have to say in just a couple of weeks. Podcast episodes of St. Louis on the Air are available at stlpublicradio.org, or you can subscribe for free on Apple Podcasts, the Google Podcast app, or anywhere else you get your podcasts. St. Louis on the Air is a production of St. Louis Public Radio 90.7 KWMU. Thank you for listening. I'm Don Marsh.
Support comes from Missouri Forest Products Association, committed to sustainable and sound conservation of the state's forests, which support more than 41,000 Missouri jobs, resulting in a $10 billion industry. ChooseWood.com.